I don't know.
To the road. Yeah, not so from the side.
Hopefully it comes on.
It does. They reposted that 55 already.
I'm
So
done.
it surprised me.
That's the extent of my knowledge.
There was actually, their site distance to their left and right is actually
And here.
that forward. It's really just that differential.
Good idea. Very good. Grab yours, the tooth.
John didn't grab his.
Get the cane, guys. Get the cane. We're surrounded by Kims. Yeah.
Okay, folks, well, welcome to the December 12th Water Committee meeting. Christina, these microphones, we're good to go. We don't need to touch them? Okay, all right. Real quick about the microphones, it was mentioned that if we're too close to them during the recording, it gets a little loud for the people listening. So they've set the microphones where they want them, and I think if we don't touch them, we should be okay. So with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I am passing around a roll call sheet. Please sign it so we have a written confirmation of who is here. One quick note with regards to the recording. I brought a tripod and a selfie stick, and I taped the two together. Someone made a mention of maybe recording this on Facebook Live. I have never touched Facebook Live. I don't know anything about it, but if anyone is in the audience or any of the committee members know how to do that, I have this set up so that you can do that. I think it's a great idea, so we can reach a few more people with our mission. So it's the tripod is over here to the right if someone wants to take charge, and I more than welcome you to. So and a second note on recording. So our recording system apparently went down at last council meeting. Mid-States, is that correct, Brian? Mid-States was here today trying to fix it. They put a different unit in.
Yeah, they attempted to. Didn't work, so we're back to the old unit, but they took it out of where it was at and placed it. They're thinking it might be a heating issue.
Okay, so for those of you who didn't hear, it was in kind of a cubbyhole area. They think it might be overheating, so hopefully that problem is solved. I definitely, if someone could record this on their phone, I absolutely.
We've got an audio.
And you've got an audio set up, okay? With that being said, we'll hope for the best and hope it makes it. So let's just go through the agenda real quick. I'll let you know kind of where we're going tonight, and then we'll get started. We're going to talk about the mission statement here in just a minute, and then I'm going to introduce Mark Mayer. He's here from the Department of Environmental and Natural Resources, and I'm very glad he took the time out. He took his own personal time to come here and speak for us. So he's going to address us. I told him anywhere around that 30 to 40 minute mark would be good, and then after that we'll have us plenty of time for question and answer session. So after Mark speaks with us, then we are going to also have another speaker here from MCWC, and we'll get to the reason why he's here and some of the discussion that has already been occurring over the last few weeks regarding that. But a representative from MCWC will be here. I told him to show up around 7:15 because we probably won't get to him before that. So, and then we're gonna talk about an MCWC connection after he gives us some information. We're going to talk about a connection to MCWC for the short term and the long term, and then we're going to talk about an RFQ and RFP process. After that, I'm just going to kind of open the floor up, and anybody that has any relevant information for today's meeting or for future meetings, I'd like to open the floor up and let's just have an open discussion. And then we'll recap and talk about what we're going to present to the council at next week's meeting. So, with that being said, Mark, Mr. Mayor, Mark Mayor. So Mark, the floor is yours. However you want to handle it. Mark said he didn't have a formal presentation. He's more of he just wants to have an open discussion after he presents his ideas for us. So we're not going to do a PowerPoint. He's just going to kind of talk and walk. And I think if it's okay with you, if you want to do this another way, but if it's okay with you, maybe we let him speak and give us his information, and we can talk afterwards and enter into a question and answer discussion.
Okay. Does this sound, people hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Well, I thought I'd just kind of give you all an overview of what the drinking water program does with the state and how we oversee water systems and how they're regulated. And then I can talk more specifically about Brandon's compliance history and some of the water quality that we track and that you all submit to us and how that falls out. So the state...
Yes.
Does he want to sit at the table so the microphones pick up? He's
We've got a
very
mic.
hard to hear.
There's one right over here.
Oh, I'm
You
sorry.
can't see it, but yeah. Can you hear him okay?
You can't hear you very loudly.
Here, Mark, I tell you what, come sit or stand where I'm at, and I'll move to the back.
Yeah, turn your mic on. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a camera on the wall there, so
Okay,
this
I'll
might be the
sit
best.
down.
So I'll let you kick me out of my seat.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay. So anyway, as I was saying, the federal EPA delegates the implementation of the Safe Drinking Water Act to the state, and then they provide some grant money for us to do the work that we do. So we implement the federal drinking water standards for South Dakota. There are just statewide, for your information, there's 647 water systems that are regulated. 464 of those are community systems, so cities and housing subdivisions, those sorts of things where people drink the water every day. Then we also have a class of water system called a non-community, and that would be a tourist business or a business that has their own private well but serves a population that works there during the day. So that's called a non-community. So they don't necessarily have that water every day. So there's a little less sampling requirements for that class of system. But there's about 183 of those systems. Most of those are out in the Black Hills. But anyway, the Safe Drinking Water Act establishes two different types of standards. There's the National Primary Drinking Water Standards, so those are what we call the health-based standards, and the parameters that are associated with those primary standards have a health consequence if the maximum contaminant level is exceeded. And those are also what we call enforceable. So if a water system exceeds one of those levels, then we work with them, but at a certain point we may have to what we call enforce them to comply. So we have administrative orders and compliance decrees and things like that we enter into with that system to get them back in compliance. So the types of parameters that are primary standards are like the inorganic chemicals, like the metals, mercury, chromium, those sorts of things. Then there's lead and copper. Everybody's heard about lead and copper with the National Flint, Michigan, that sort of thing. Radionuclides, which you all are familiar with. Arsenic, Then there's organic chemicals, so those are like synthetic organics, which are herbicides and pesticides. There's volatile organics, which are more of a petroleum compound, that kind of thing. Then there are disinfection byproducts, and then there are a suite of microbial parameters. So in the microbial world, we get total coliform rule, surface water treatment rule, groundwater rule, just depending on what a system source of supply is. So there's a large number of parameters here that water systems, community water systems in particular, sample for over about 90 different parameters or contaminants that they monitor for. And then within those, there are different monitoring schedules and compliance determinations based on what the results are. So it can get pretty complex, but we track it all, and we do, try to do as good a job as we can to ensure that everybody's following the rules and monitoring, and then if there is an exceedance of one of those parameters, or there's a failure to monitor for one of those parameters, the Safe Drinking Water Act also provides for public notice. And so the water system is responsible to notify their customers if they fail to monitor or if they exceeded a standard. And then within the public notice requirements, there are levels or tiers, we call them, of notice. So an acute violation, which would be an immediate risk to health, they have 24 hours to get the word out to their customers, and that's our most serious public notice. And that happens like if you would have an E. coli hit or something like that, then we'd have a boil order and all sorts of things like that. Then there's a Tier 2 notice, which is an exceedance of a chemical parameter, but not an acute risk, so a chronic risk to health. And so the standards are set up for a lifetime of exposure before you have this increased risk. So it's not like the immediacy of drink one glass and you get sick type notice. So that's a Tier 2 notice, and then there's a Tier 3 notice, like a failure to monitor, and that they can give a system up to a year to get that word out to the system. So then that's the Safe Drinking Water Act and the timelines that were established by EPA. So those are the primary drinking water standards. And then there are also what we call secondary drinking water standards, and those standards are not enforceable. So if a system exceeds a secondary standard, we can't require them to meet that standard, and these standards are not health-based standards. They're more of a cosmetic or an aesthetic issue with the water. So color, taste, odor, so the total dissolved solids, the hardness, those sorts of things are secondary standards. And so those are recommendations, but they're not requirements. So we can't force the system to comply with those. So beyond the standards, our program is also required to do on-site inspections of all water systems. For community systems, every 3 years we visit the system, we go through the system with the operators, we interview the finance officer or the financial contact. We talk about not only the technical aspects of the water system, but also the managerial and the financial management of the water system, and just get an idea if everything's going as it should. And then beyond that, we also run what we call our operator certification program. And so every community water system is required to have a certified operator, and there are different levels of certification that an operator needs depending on the complexity of the system. So the city of Sioux Falls has a full-blown surface water treatment plant with a lot of mechanical processes and different things. So that system requires the highest level of certification for an operator to be in charge of the water that is delivered to the customers from that system. You get to a small subdivision or a housing subdivision with a single well and no chlorination, no anything, then they have a very, a basic level of certification requirements. And then there's, there's 4 levels. So there's, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, and there's treatment, and then there's also distribution, which is the conveyance of the water throughout the city and the pipes. And so there's kind of 2 different types of operator certification. And then with that, the certified operators have to get continuing education and professional development hours on so many hours per certificate, that sort of thing. And we track all of that. We provide the training for free. We have a very low exam rate so that people can be certified that need to be, and keep the cost down to the communities that need that requirement or need that. One of the things that we do that kind of ties in here too is for about the last, for 16 years we've been issuing award every year for systems that comply with all of the requirements. So they've met all of the standards, and they've also done all of the monitoring, have the appropriate certified operator, all of that stuff. And so for 16 years we've been doing that, and in calendar year 2016, of the 647 systems, like 420 systems got an award. And so a thing we did also after, we've been doing it for a while, after a community achieved compliance for 10 consecutive years, we created another level of award called the Secretary's Award in Drinking Water Excellence. And it's an achievement, we feel, to meet all of these standards, take all the samples, do all the reporting, have all the certification requirements met, all that for 10 or more years in a row. And so last year we had 108 systems in the state got that certificate for the Secretary's Award. And I drilled down into the numbers a little bit further, and of the 108 systems that received an award, only 44 systems in the state had gotten the award for 16 years in a row. So for as many years as we've been doing it. And Brandon is one of those 44. So I bring that to your attention just because I feel it's important that the staff and the city be commended with the work that they're doing behind the scenes to keep up with all of the federal requirements, because there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people may not realize. So with that, I'll kind of open it up to, that's just kind of my general overview of the drinking water program. We have about 10 of us in my program that do all this work. So my staff does a great job, and they're always available by phone for anybody to call and ask questions. So even if you don't have one tonight, if you have a specific question about a specific parameter, we have what we call rule managers, and they're the experts on that particular parameter, and they can talk to you about the contaminant, the monitoring requirements, the health effects, that sort of stuff. But another thing that we do every year, or help the systems do every year, is create a drinking water report, and that is also a requirement of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so we have nearly 100%, if not 100% compliance with this at the federal level, which is pretty good. But we generate these, we have all the data, so we generate the report for the communities so that they can just distribute it. And so in each year you should get notice that this report is available, and it reviews some of the information about your water supply, and then it also has a table of the 90-some parameters that are tested for, ones that were detected. It gives you what they were detected at and where they are relative to the standard. And so it's kind of helpful and useful information. Another table goes in here if any system has a violation, then that's noted in the table, a separate table, so that the residents can see what the system violated and what they've done about it and that kind of thing. And then there's contact information here for who they can get a hold of with the system to talk about the water quality and that kind of stuff. So that's something out there, and these are out on our website, and we have if you would navigate to DENR's homepage, then there's a category called water, and then you can find drinking water, and then once you're on the drinking water homepage, on the left side there's some different choices, and one near the top is a choice called Your Water System Information, and if you click on that, it'll pull up a map of the state, and it's kind of messy when you first pull it up because it's the entire state, and it has little stick pins of all of the water systems in the state. But then you can zoom in to your area, and then of course they spread out, and you can find your water system, and you can click on that, and we make this report available out there, and then we also have some other, we have a summary report which looks like this that gives contact information as well as, you know, notes if they've gotten an award, or there's a little policeman if they didn't get an award and says, you didn't get an award. So, but it also outlines the monitoring schedule and the compliance, like, you know, here's Brandon's, and I ran it here today, and for the bacteriological samples, they've sampled 123 times, and they do 10 a month, and 122 of those were safe, one was unsafe. They did repeat samples, those were safe. So, you know, it's information that's readily available to the public. We also have information on the lead sampling results. After Flint hit, there was a big push to get transparency of lead numbers and all that stuff out there. So we took out the names of the people's homes that we're from, but their address is there, so you can kind of get a sense of where it is relative to your house, and then what the results are. And again, we would talk to anybody on the phone about those results. But Brandon's in really great shape, lead and copper wise too. The results from this August, the lead action level, it was the 90th percentile was 2 parts per billion, and the action level was 15. So you're in good shape from the lead standpoint. The other report that we put out there is when we're on site collecting or doing the on-site sanitary survey or the inspection that we do every few years, we also collect what we call a common ion sample, and that has the different parameters like hardness and total dissolved solids, but as well as some other a whole bunch of other alkalinity and calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, some different ions like that. And so I know that that's been a topic of discussion here with folks, and I thought I'd give you some context of what, but anyway, out on the website you can get that report for Brandon, so you can see what years we've collected the data and then what the results are. People use that to help dial in their water softener if they have one in their home, that kind of thing. So it's useful for that, as well as water quality for economic development purposes. If you have an industry come to town, they might need certain water quality, so it gets used for other reasons, other than people programming their software. But anyway, to give you some context for Brandon, the average that we had for total dissolved solids was 484 parts per million, or milligrams per liter. And the statewide average of all the systems that we had data on was 603. The secondary standard for total dissolved solids is 500, so you're just under the secondary standard for total dissolved solids. The minimums in the state was 7 for total dissolved solids, and the maximum was 3,311. So just gives you some context to the number. And then in the hardness category, now this is the treated number, so the statewide average will include systems that soften. So Sioux Falls or Minnehaha Community Water, they soften, so their treated hardness is lower because they remove some of that hardness. But anyway, the statewide average is 294. Brandon's average hardness is 374. The minimum is 1. The maximum was 1,740. So you're kind of in the middle of the pack. When you look at the entire universe, you're kind of right in the middle. I think on the can't remember on the Excel spreadsheet, you were like 242nd of 400 and some. So you're right there in the middle. As far as the other parameters that have recently been, or our latest compliance results, for all the inorganic chemicals, you had no detections, and that's not unusual. A lot of systems have no detections. For volatile organics, and so the petroleum type parameters, and then the synthetic organics, so the herbicides and pesticides, also no detects on those. So when you have things like that with no detects, then the Safe Drinking Water Act allows us to put systems on what we call reduced monitoring. So it allows the system to they still have to monitor, but less frequently, so it saves you money, so your water rates don't have to bear the cost of that additional treatment. So you're on reduced monitoring, and in some cases we have waivers, and a system can apply for waivers depending on their source and how it's located and what chemicals are used in the watershed and that kind of stuff. But anyway, so non-detects on all of those. Nitrate, the standard for nitrate is 10 parts per million, and you're at 0.7, so you're well below that, which is good. And nitrite, which is another product of that, is a no detect. And then the radiological chemicals, you took your compliance sample. The last one you took was in 2014, and that's a triennial, so every 3 years you have to take that. And 3 years ago in 2014, the results for gross alpha was 10 picocuries per liter, and the standard is 15, so you're below that. And then the combined radium was, I believe, 1, and the standard for that is 5. Now the sample that Brandon collected, I just checked with the lab today. The sample that you all collected and submitted in October is still being run at the lab, but gross alpha was available and read out, and that came in at 10.2, so very similar to what it was in 2014. The radium, the combined radium, 226, 228, that takes longer in the test. It's like a 30-day test when they get it set up in an instrument that measures, and they haven't read out radium yet. So that should be coming in the next week or two, I would think. But from all indications, things are looking good for well. I think that's the well number 6. I think is what that came from. So all in all, like I said, Brandon's water from the regulatory world is meeting the standards, and I thought I'd give some context to a couple of those numbers that that were talked about in terms of the secondary standards. And then, those become really a community decision as to what the community wants to do on the secondary standards. And so some communities have chosen to soften and some don't, and everybody has a water softener in their house. Here we missed the boat on rural water connections, and so we have wells and we have hardness, and everybody's got a water softener in our house, and we also have iron and manganese. So when you come to here and you see all the black and brown buildings, that's the iron and manganese in our water that we take out in our house, but of course we don't irrigate with softened water.
Do you test other wells in Brandon? You mentioned well 6. Is it randomly?
Well, any source that's being used as a permanent supply, it has to do all of the sampling. If there's a source that's an emergency supply that's not being used, but if well number 6 or the primary well went down and you had the choice of no water or this water and fire protection or pressurization in the system, then that emergency source is not sampled. In any system. If the emergency source gets pulled online and used and contributes more than 25% of the volume over the course of a year, then we say, well, it's not really an emergency here. You're relying on this more full time. So now you need to do this monitoring so that we know everything's good. And last year, we had a heck of a drought last year, and so there were systems that were struggling to keep up. Some of those were connected to a regional system, and they have on those regional systems they have a contracted amount. They get 100 gallons a minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's what they get. They can't have 105, or more. And so some systems that weren't keeping up with the 100 gallons a minute, or whatever their amount, their contracted amount, they started pulling up their old wells that they forgot about and why they switched in the first place, and then they had we fielded a lot of complaints with water quality, just taste, odor. Then anytime you start blending sources that have different water qualities, you have to start paying attention to that too, and then it brings on a whole level of additional testing depending on how long and how much they use it. So
how would you know? Does the city of Brandon typically let you know when they're moving to a different source?
Yeah, a system, if they switch sources or add additional sources, they're supposed to let us know. That's part of the training and the certified operator. That operator is in charge of the quality, quantity of the water that's being delivered, and so part of their responsibility is to let us know, and generally that happens. Occasionally we might hear about it where we get a call from somebody that says, man, my water is completely different today from yesterday, and then we start making calls, and then sometimes an operator gets a new operator comes on, or somebody retires and takes over, and they don't necessarily know how they're supposed to do it. So then we have contracts with what we call technical assistance providers. So there's a couple of them in the state. The South Dakota Association of Rural Water Systems has what they call circuit riders, and they are guys that show up in their pickups with pictures of pipe and quality on tap and some things like that, and they help operators. They know how to turn valves. We fund them with some specialized equipment for leak detection or different locators and different things like that to help communities operate their systems when, especially a smaller system or a small community, that the water operator is also the city guy, who does everything, and then, he's also the fire chief, and he's everything, who we're talking about. So So in those cases, sometimes those guys need a little extra hands, so we get somebody like rural water out there to help them, and we'll make the call, and that doesn't cost the community anything. And some of the grant money that we get from EPA or from our state revolving loan fund, we use that to help systems with some of those more technical things. And then we also, there's another technical assistance provider called Midwest Assistance Providers, or MAP, and they're also water professionals, and they can help systems. They do help like with financial and managerial type stuff. They can help with technical things too. They don't have as much equipment, and so they're maybe not quite as hands-on with the operator, but they do finance officer training and water board training and stuff like that, because water, communities don't necessarily realize sometimes what's all involved with running a water system, and how you need to keep books and set rates and stuff to cover your costs and that kind of thing. So we can kind of rally those sorts of resources to systems when needed to help with keeping water flowing, and that everybody can take that resource for granted. That's kind of the best position a city or a system can be in, is with everybody can turn on the tap and it's there and it's ready and it's safe.
So Mark, with respect to the radium, specifically radium 226 and 228, I think there's a lot of concern with this well 7 that is possibly going to come online.
Okay.
Can you speak to that? I guess I didn't understand. I would assume that our water would need to be, the radium level or gross alpha or combined would need to be read coming out of the treatment plant, no matter what well it is.
Yep.
And so if I heard you right, you're saying the gross alpha and radium that you spoke of is from well 6. But if we brought well 7 on and we're using well 7 in conjunction with well 6, are you going to test at the well site, or are you going to test treated? Because I know there's a lot of concern about
it. Depends. That's a good question. So we talk about compliance is measured at the entry point. And so in Pierre's case, we have 13 wells scattered all around town. And when one of them gets called to turn on, it comes on and it pumps immediately into the water system out in front of the street in front of it. And then the next house next door is drinking that water right there. And so in that case, each well is the source is also the entry point.
When you say entry point, do you mean entry into the water treatment?
Entry
or
into the
pipes
distribution
that go to our
system.
house?
Yeah,
Okay.
entry to that,
Okay.
to your house.
Okay.
So when you have a system that has a well field, and those wells pump to a treatment plant, and then it gets treated, and then from there it goes out to, so Sioux Falls, they've got all sorts of wells, and surface water intake, and Lewis and Clark. So they've got 2 entry points. They've got their treatment plant there by the airport, and then they have the entry point from Lewis and Clark south of town. So they have 2.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, and then Lewis and Clark is required to do the entry point sampling because they deliver the water, so they produce it. And Sioux Falls only just does the distribution system testing of that water, but they do all the entry point testing of their water. But they bring all of their wells or the surface water from Big Sioux into their treatment plant. It gets treated, and then when it leaves, they measure it there. So in Brandon's case, if this new well 7 were to be combined and blended with well 6, we would be looking at the combined. Now the question arises, well, how do you know what's being blended or which wells are on or whatever? And that when if we know that there's a well in the mix that has issues with the standards, exceeds the standards, then Then we look for some plan or assurance from the community to say, okay, this is how this well will be limited to use, you know, or how we will control the blend so that we know we're delivering water below the standard. And then like if there was well 7, if there was a radium treatment system, then we might, you know, especially the first year or whatever while that treatment system is operating, will require more monitoring on that to ensure that the treatment system that has been installed is performing appropriately, and then after that we could maybe, you know, we would, depending on our confidence in the system and how it's being operated, we may allow for some reduced monitoring. But in the radionuclides case, there are a variety of reduced monitoring, but anytime a system is treating for something like that, then they're not able to, you know, like there are some systems that only sample for radionuclides once every 9 years, but if they were treating, we would never go less than annually. So, and then radium is one of those, like I said, all these different parameters have different compliance monitoring frequencies and compliance determinations, and so radium is one of those. It's considered a chronic contaminant, so it's not an acute risk to health, and so compliance is determined on the average of 4 quarterly samples. So if a system collected a initial sample and that came in at 10, we'll just talk out loud, or hypotheticals. So it came in at 10, so that's double the standard. Well, the standard is based on an average of 4 quarters. So then we tell the system, okay, you need to go to quarterly monitoring now. So then they would be required to collect 4 more samples. Now, we look at that initial sample and we divide that by 4 to see so if it was 21 and we divided by 4, it would be over 5. So we would call that an immediate violation. And we would say you have to issue a public notice and you got to get to work figuring out how to get back into compliance. But if it was 10, we divide that by 4, it's 2.5. So we say, yep, you can keep using that source, but you need to take another sample next quarter. And then if that came in at 10, not 11, we'd have 20. We'd divide that by, not by 4, but anyway, we do the math, it wouldn't come out. It would be right at 5, so it wouldn't be, still wouldn't be an exceedance. It'd be right there, but it wouldn't be an exceedance, and so they'd be, but by then, if it's that, you know, the handwriting is sort of on the wall, so then we're talking with the city or the system saying, you know, you're going to exceed if you continue to use this well, but sometimes it's their only choice. And so they continue to use the well, they exceed, they notify their public, and they work on a solution. And solutions for radium treatment are available and well documented. It's just a matter of implementing, and sometimes they're expensive. And so the Department of Environment and Natural Resources has another division that is called our Division of Financial and Technical Assistance, and they have a state revolving loan fund program, and they also have consolidated grant money and different funding sources. And so when a system is out of compliance, we can work with that system and with the board that approves those loans to try and get a funding package available to that system so that they can get a treatment system in place. And we've had in cases of radium and radionuclides, sometimes those take a long time to get figured out, or rural water's coming but they're 3 years away and that kind of thing. And so we've had systems operate for years exceeding the standard. Everybody knows quarterly they're getting notified, and so then that community is making choices on whether they're gonna, you know, use that water to drink. It's a chronic exposure or a lifetime. It's, you know, depending on the levels, it's a personal choice at that time, or a community decision at that time as to what they want to do. And we require them to do the public noticing and that kind of thing. In smaller systems, we have a subdivision out in rural Rapid City that has a combined radium exceeding 20, and it's like 12 homes. And so it's a small subdivision, so it's hard for them to afford a full-blown, you know, centralized treatment unit. But the Safe Drinking Water Act has provisions in it to allow individual, what we call point of entry treatment units, and water softeners. The common water softener is very effective at removing radium. And so the caveat for them to do that for compliance, the water system, so in this case the homeowners association, has to own all of the water systems in everybody's house, and then they have to operate them. So you can't put the burden of compliance on the homeowner. So it becomes the homeowners association's responsibilities, and in that case they contract with the Culligan man or the, you know, a water softener company, that, and they come and they deliver the salt into each person's home, and they annually certify that all of the systems have been operating, and then we require a third of each of those softeners to be sampled, and so in every 3 years somebody's individual softener would need to be. But as you can tell, that also requires 100% participation. If one resident said, "Oh, nope, you're not getting in my house, I don't want you in my house, I'm out," then they can't use that, and then they'd have to go down the road of some centralized treatment or look for an alternate source or whatever. So we do have one system that does that, have another couple that are on the fringes of doing that. But we have some systems that have put in a large-scale softener. They buy salt by the pallet. They have a great big softener, and they have a backwash pond that, this is arid western South Dakota, so they discharge the regeneration water to a holding lagoon, and it evaporates, and they treat all their water with the water softener.
So with respect to radium, I have a question for you, but I want to get some information on the table, because we've heard in our well 7 that we're not using yet.
Yep.
I've heard numbers, 12 and a half, and then I've heard numbers over 20, and I think the report states that's after X amount of hours of pumping. As a council member, I get questions regarding that quite a bit, and to be honest, I'll be very honest, to me it's concerning. So first of all, before we get to the question, my question for anybody in the room from City Hall or Stockwell, can we establish what is the radium level in well 7?
Yes, we did a sample in October. It's sitting in the state lab now.
What about the reports prior to that, though? I mean, these reports that were showing it over 20, are we?
That was during an aquifer test, if I'm not
That was a
mistaken.
pump test after.
Yeah, an aquifer test, where they were actually testing the capability of the aquifer to hold type of water that they want. They run the pump they pump it hard for a long period of time, for days. And then if the water is sampled from the well, the raw water. And the numbers that I have seen are from the pump test, from the aquifer test.
But how would that differ from like an actual test if you were to go out there and test it? I guess, and for those of you who don't know, Pat Hammond, she's a hydrologist. This is kind of her forte. So, I mean, feel free to speak. And I do want to. I mean, I do want to get to a question and answer.
Yeah.
But that's one thing that comes up a lot, and I want to I guess I would like to understand it better. How does a pump test differ from an actual test if you were to walk out there and test it right now? Am I alone on this? I don't understand.
Great question.
Well, I think it's just a raw sample. As a well gets developed, you might see a different result as it's developing. You know, you're drawing water from farther from the aquifer into the well.
Oh.
And so like we had a well in Box Elder that when they did the initial samples, it came back high. As they pumped, they were doing this game with the quarterly sampling, and as they pumped, they developed the well. They were pumping into the drinking water system, the quarterly sampling, and then as those quarterly samples came in, the level went down, and then they were, by the fourth quarter, they had results. They never exceeded their annual average of the quarterly samples was below the standard, so they were good to go. They didn't have to do any treatment. But they had a second well that they tried the same thing, and after 2 quarters, they were like, "We're done. It's flat. It's rising. It's not dropping. So we're gonna abandon this well for the time being and look into treatment options or an alternate well." But they these are 3,000-foot deep wells, so it's not like they're walking away from $1 million kind of a thing.
What was that level? Do you know?
Well, that was in that it was in that between 10 and 20, and so they had a couple of quarters to play with, and then they were done. And so
What I don't understand is, you say the well has to be developed, and as water pumps in, as it's developing, it goes down. How can it go
well,
down?
it
Could.
can,
It could, we don't know that.
but it may stay the same. It may be the same, but the
That's
bottom
why you
line
do
is
the
you got to
test.
look at the treatment side of things, and if you're installing any sort of treatment, can the treatment handle whatever you throw at it?
So it's the treatment that potentially causes it to go down to be
Well, the
acceptable?
treatment would be the purpose of the treatment would be to remove the radium to
Right.
get it down to a. But maybe if you're starting at 20, and these are all hypothetical.
Right.
If you're starting at 20 and your treatment system lowers it to 10, and then you're blending it with well number 6, which has 1, then you figure out, well, what percentage of the volume do I need to control so that I never exceed 5 on my blend. And that's when we start saying, okay, well, what controls are in place, what meters, and we kind of audit that so that we know that blend.
And this sample that we sent from well 7 is before treatment, right?
Right.
Right, yeah,
As far
right, that was
would
at
make
the,
sense.
for the aquifer test, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a test to see what the aquifer was made of, just to see how much you could pump, what the rates are, that sort of thing. That water then is discharged into the ditch, so no one's ever going to drink that. And that is not regulated by
Not
water
by me,
quality. Yeah,
by a different.
that's not regulated by you.
Different program within
It is
DNR,
regulated.
but not.
Right,
drinking
right,
water.
because people are not drinking that water.
Right, sure.
So even
It's
though that,
wastewater, essentially.
right, so that's a good thing to clarify, is the numbers that people have seen are from a specific test to test the aquifer. It's not a drinking water test that you're actually drinking. So you're looking at apples and oranges, really.
And so in my world, if Brandon were to say, we're going to put a treatment system online for well number 7 to remove radium, we'd be looking, and they've done pilot tests. They've shared those results with my engineering manager. He's looking at that, looking at, we look at not only the treatment, the drinking water program looks at the treated water quality that's being delivered to the drinking water system that you all use to drink, but then our other programs, the wastewater or surface water quality program, we call that, they look at, there's residuals, there's wastewater from the treatment unit that needs to be handled in accordance with their regulations. And so they work with the consultant on, you know, all of that, because you gotta take, if you're taking some of it out, you're disposing of it some way, and you need to do that appropriately. And so either the groundwater quality program or the surface water quality program will work with the community on the treatment. And we have to approve all of that. We also review the plans and specifications of any treatment system and ensure that they are meeting the minimum standards for design and standard of care for that. If you're doing a treatment system and you're funding that with state money, then our Division of Financial and Technical Assistance that has our state revolving loan funds and the grant money and stuff, or consolidated grant funds, they review the plans and specs, but then there's beyond the technical side of the specifications, there's the contractual side that needs to be met with all of the federal requirements associated with the funding. And so they make sure the contract documents that are in place, and then they also do a very close scrutiny of the ability to repay the loan. And so that's when rates start to become looked at, and we have some minimum water rates for, if you want to apply for our funding, your water rates need to be at a minimum of this in order to even qualify. But let's say the treatment system is very expensive but necessary, it's the only option, it's the best option. There's a planning process, we call it a facility planning process, that it generates a preliminary engineering report that gets reviewed by the staff in the Financial and Technical Assistance Division, and they say, yep, this project is necessary, this is their best option, but you know, boy, this is really going to impact their rates, and it's going to impact them to a point where it's far and above kind of a threshold that they look at. So then they may recommend, as part of the funding package, they can forgive, they call it, it's kind of a fancy word for a grant, but basically they call it principal forgiveness. And so the funding program is able to recommend a principal forgiveness amount, so they basically, it's part of your loan, but then part of it, you don't have to pay that back, and so then your debt service payment is based on a smaller amount that then is less an impact to the residents. And so they're a good group of folks to get to know if you're needing to spend some money on improvements. And I believe City of Brandon has a state revolving loan fund for some other water tower and some that's, I think, available to them. I don't think they've actually drawn on the money yet or anything, but that's out of my division too. So, any other questions or? I think if I did forgot my soapbox, but I think I'm encouraged to see as many people here engaged in the process, and I think it's important. Planning now is going to pay big dividends later, and securing a water supply not only for today, but looking at your long-term options is going to be time and effort and money well spent, and the people 40, 50 years from now are going to be, should be thanking you for the effort that you are going through now. So, and then next week, I believe one of my counterparts from the State Geologic Survey will be here to talk about the geology of the area, and that will be another great presentation that will be very informative and useful for you all when you formulate your recommendations for the councils.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
So does anybody have any additional questions for Mark while we have him here? Any additional information anybody wants to add or questions they want to ask, even including the audience? This is the time to get it out there. Nothing? I have a question real quick.
Okay.
You mentioned hardness, and you know, again, the questions that I get asked, I'm kind of dumping them on you here. Another concern is, you know, is hardness, and I understand that we're in the average range for hardness in the state of South Dakota. How does that compare to other states? You know, I've lived all over, and I will be the first to say, and when my family visits, you know, our hardness level here is a little higher than a lot of the places I've lived before. I mean, how does that relate?
I don't have specifics. You know, there's probably some Google search that could come up
Sure.
with that, but you know, I think it's all over the gamut.
Okay.
I mean, there's softening plants all over the world. You know, so certainly hardness is an issue in other places, and not an issue, and naturally soft in other places, and so it's just kind of all over the place. But you know, hardness is one of those things that it becomes a community decision as to, do you want to spend $20 a month on softener salt and running your softener in your home, or do you want to, you know, augment that onto a water bill and have a centralized
Right.
water softening system? You know,
And that's a big question that we're going to be.
here we collected, the city did a survey of the residents. They kind of advertised it, and it was an online survey, and they did, you know, other things, but they included information or questions of, you know, sprinkling of questions about water quality and treatment, and would you support a higher water bill if we had a centralized treatment plant and better, you know, less iron and manganese and that sort of thing. And in addition to, hey, do you want a new library, or do you want, you know, it was all sorts of community stuff. And it was a useful tool for the city commission to gauge the public interest on, you know, that issue. And in fact, they used that information to go out for bids for a consultant, and they're doing this study right now to look at some of our treatment options for you know, improving the water quality in Pierre.
With that, I have also read studies that even if the city puts in a softening system, depending on your preference, households could still have to have a water softener in their house as well. So it's not a
It's not
fix.
like an all or nothing thing.
Right.
It's a matter of how soft do you
Right.
choose.
So it may soften your water, but if it's not to your preference, you still may have to have a water softener in your house.
And that's part of the math equation. That's how much hardness do you want to remove centrally, and then how much do you want to allow people to choose beyond that.
Is the central softening system, if there was a radiant problem, asking there, if there was, would that help control radiant also?
Possibly. Possibly. It depends on the type of softening. So radium removal relies more on an ion exchange mechanism, and where some softening isn't necessarily ion exchange. It's just a process. But
EPA has a list of available technologies for radiant removal, and lime softening is on that list.
right. I mean,
Cold water softeners are on
yeah.
that list, reverse osmosis.
So some of the data you provided as far as numbers for hardness and TDS and gross alpha, those are probably the three biggest concerns I think in this community, but as well as others. Is that, and the reason I'm asking you this is because this committee is going to have to reach a decision about water sources and water quality at some point. So the information that you're providing, is that coming just from the wells in the state, or does that include, because I look at Lewis and Clark, you know, river or water out of the river, and obviously that river comes from upstate, you know, so that's probably a constantly changing number, how does
Well,
that work?
Well, those numbers, those were the treated, that was the treated.
That's just the,
So that includes the softening systems, that includes surface water, groundwater, the
Okay.
whole gamut. So that's the average statewide, but, you know,
That's the average statewide regardless of the
regardless
aquifer.
of the,
If it's, your water quality will be dependent upon the type of aquifer that the water
Right.
comes from. It
Right.
could be superficial or it could be buried. If it's buried, generally it's coming out of rock. So it's
Bedrock
gonna be,
aquifer.
it's gonna be harder, as opposed to the Big Sioux, where your water's gonna be softer, just because you don't have all that bedrock interfering with the water and grabbing all those components out of the water, out of the
Okay.
rock to put in the water. Which is why you have radium, because the split rock lies directly upon the Sioux quartzite. It is coming from the Sioux
the
quartzite.
quartzite, right?
The way to get rid of the radium is to not to use the split rock treatment. A lot of this will become clear with Derek next week,
Next week.
when he talks about aquifers and different types. And then you'll also have a very good idea of the aquifer availability in the state. South Dakota is not real plentiful in surface water or groundwater. Our options are limited, first of all. And that's why you have people drinking, you know, horrendously hard water. You know, it won't hurt them, but they will put up with that,
they acclimate.
because they don't have a choice.
You know, we've tested radium either at the well or at the plant. Have we ever tested it out of a faucet at someone's house to see what the differential would be? I mean, I know that's not a requirement, but have we ever done it?
Not usually done in entry point.
Yeah, it shouldn't really change.
Should be the same.
Yeah, but what you're saying is if everybody's using softener systems,
Oh,
and
yeah,
that has,
well,
and
yeah.
that has some reduction. I'm just curious if, you know, we have at potential, 4 wells at some point that could be coming into the plant and discharging with no treatment, so we're gonna have different levels blended together out into our system. Plus, I know we soften a lot, most people do. I'm just curious on just what we have now, what difference would that make in our faucets? Because it may be more than we think.
The trick within faucets that we have to keep in mind is it truly depends on how the softener was installed. In my home, as an example, my cold water is not run through the softener, so my drinking water would not be run through an ion exchange softener.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah, so there's a variety.
If it weren't so expensive, that would be a really good test to do and do a comparison. That would be interesting.
What are the levels of hardness for like Sioux Falls, just for an example?
Well, I just happen to have that.
There's the softened, isn't it?
So Sioux Falls is yeah, they soften. So their untreated average for hardness is 521, and then after they treat it, it's 259.
And so is that something you think we'll do, is we'll generate a cost estimate for softening from 374 to 250? Just,
Absolutely.
you know,
That is-
so we can determine whether it's potentially cheaper to do it at one location versus our home.
That's why I'm kind of bringing this up and beating a dead horse, because this is gonna come back to us. This is a major issue that we need to tackle. And
Well-
like you say, there's a lot of variables out there. I think we need to look at it as, what are we delivering, regardless of what people have in their homes, whether they have a softener or not, we need to look at what are we delivering to those homes, in my
And
opinion.
then not to steal many ha-ha's thunder, but they soften too, so.
Okay. Well, and that's good to know. I mean, if there's a lot of systems out there that are softening their water for the residents or for the end user, I'd like to know that, because I'd like to, again, this is gonna come up, so.
Is Sioux Falls not rated like the 3rd best water drinking in the nation?
Oh, that's subjective. Something like that. Yeah, we have some conferences with water operators and stuff, and folks, some systems can bring a sample, and we do a taste test, and it's, you know, I've been the judge before, it's tough. But Sioux Falls has
Been rated up
been
there.
rated, they've won. And it's a friendly competition between systems, and they are proudly shepherding the record or the winning sample on occasion. There's a tight battle between Lewis and Clark.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Any other questions?
So going back to well number 7 and the startup of that well, so we're not using it now, but when we do, what's the compliance and the testing going to look like once that well does start to become utilized, or and we've also got a new treatment process for that. So what's that going to look like, and how is that testing going to be performed to make sure that the well number 7, when it does come online, is meeting the same compliance that well number 6 is currently meeting?
So we'll look at the pilot test results. And then once the treatment system is brought online, if it were decided, yep, we're implementing this full scale, then we would establish a compliance monitoring schedule, probably quarterly. Depending on the manufacturer or the supplier of the equipment, they may do it even more often than that, just to make sure their product is performing. That can also be something you could write into the specifications of the treatment system and the startup and that kind of stuff as a performance guarantee or whatever. But there's a lot of things you can do creatively, and work with your consultant and the manufacturer. You're paying for some of that, but it's probably good insurance to ensure that the treatment system, if that was the decision to go forward with, that's performing as it's designed. And then if that were designed truly to bring it down low enough to become blended with the other stuff, then we would be getting involved with, okay, how's the blend work and what are the controls in place to ensure that the blend is happening, all the time, or, that average blend is happening. And that kind of thing.
It would be tested before it was ever blended, correct?
Well, certainly the
pilot would.
The pilot, but even the full-scale plant, I'm sure will include testing of the effluent or the treated water before it's blended with anything, so that they know what it's treating to, so that they know if they need to blend or not. It may be treated all the way down to below the standard, and it won't matter. And they could run just well 7 treated, and it'll be treated below the standard, and it'll be all fine. So it just depends on the treatment and the effectiveness of that and the cost of that treatment. And there'll be disposal costs of the residuals, and again, kind of a grand math equation too.
And again, I think that's important. We're going to have to look at the cost. Is well 7 worth it? Is it cost effective? Or do we need to seek water elsewhere? I think that's something that we have in front of us that is going to be...
And as Pat mentioned, I think next week, his presentation will be very informative on the availability of water resources in this specific part of geologic South Dakota. And then, I think it'll lend to the need or the support of a comprehensive water supply study that looks at short-term, mid-term, long-term options and what's best for the community. And then, with the support that's seen here, you've got some traction and some momentum to
There's a lot of traction.
make some, hopefully you can direct that in a positive manner and do the right thing for the community, so that you're set for that, everybody to be able to take that for granted.
Well, Mark, I sure appreciate your time. I can't thank you enough for coming out and talking with us. This has been, I think, very helpful.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We're always available on the phone if anybody has any other questions or wants to call us with more specifics later. Just 1-800-GET-DE.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Mark. Okay, so any questions, comments for the group after hearing this?
It was mentioned maybe a performance guarantee. Do we know if Tonka Water has a performance guarantee on that system that they would?
Like a warranty basically on that pilot study they did?
Mark kind of mentioned that, you know, if it's at a certain, that it would be able to get it down to that certain level. I'm wondering if.
Oh, you mean on the treatment end?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Because Tonka was the company that did our treatment plant
Right.
upgrades. It'd be interesting to know if they had some kind of performance guarantee that says we guarantee it'll get it below MCL, blah, blah, blah.
That's a
I'm
good,
just curious.
yeah,
if
that's a
you
good
have
question. Do you, anybody know?
And you would
Yeah,
know
that's
that.
a great question. There's no guarantee on the product. Their pilot that they had run, Tonka had run, actually was basically they run a dual pilot, basically, with a green sand media, and compared that with the Tonka media. And the Tonka media, if we were to switch out our media within the filter, within the plant, would improve that ability of removing more radium. The green sand can remove about 82% of that, is what that pilot indicated. So that's what we were going to plan to have our blending program that's been developed is based on that. And so we've got a blending program developed that we're working with the operators, so that when we do take well 7 online, it's actually blended so that it actually will meet the limits going in. And we're going to use the higher limits first and work our way down based on what the pilot, because there is the scare of there's a thought of the rating being higher than 10, like the pilot indicated as well. And so we've started with the higher levels of radium and blended accordingly. And so our blending program is based on that. And then we're going to wean it off, if you will, until we get down to what we feel comfortable with on the blending and the treatment. And so, you know, with the, if well 7 were to meet, if we were to, once we run the treatment pilot, we will actually be, if it actually, the radium levels were in the 10, we'd be at somewhere around 2.5.
With their proprietary media or what we have in place, the green
We
sand?
have it.
Okay, because I want to make everyone aware that the proprietary media that Tonka has is something that they've developed, and it is more costly than
Yeah.
what we have in place. It's important to know. Again, everything's at a cost, right? We can do anything. We got to figure out what we want to do, given the cost.
Yeah, well, and, you know, it's not that easy to switch to media. I mean, it's something that's going to.
Well, again, a cost to be associated with just switching the media, much less the cost of the media, right?
That's important to realize that, I mean, a blending program is important as we do our pilot through that well setup.
Mhm.
When we start, we monitor that very closely, obviously, and we'll make it, you know, trying to make sure that we never exceed that by.
Okay. So,
So I have
good
another
question, yes.
So if you run the treatment plant at capacity, are you going to keep your efficiency percentages? That's going to
What
drop?
do you mean on the,
Yeah, your radium removal, the percentage, is that going to?
First of all, the plant efficiencies won't be as high as they are now, just because we're going to be backwashing more often.
Mhm.
So the plant efficiencies are going to be reduced. But the, you know, we haven't tested that part of it.
Yeah.
It's going to be part of the plant test. Go ahead.
So that pilot, I believe, was run at about 3 gallons per square foot of filter media. That's what our plant capacity is.
Okay, that's
So
the
pilot
max.
is- Yeah,
Okay.
so we piloted about the same capacity.
Okay, so you've tested the max?
Yes.
And I don't think we'll get to that max because of the.
That would be lovely if we did not do that.
All right, good question. Anybody else? Again, well 7 is, you know, is going to be a discussion that we may just save for 1 or 2 meetings all by itself, and we can go over the costs associated with treating it and the back, you know, the efficiency, the backwash, the radium levels into the treatment or into the wastewater. I mean, these are all questions that I get asked on a regular basis, and we need to address them. So, any other questions regarding our discussion with the DENR? Yes, sir.
I would like to add one other thing. You know, we've had, the city has conducted some other studies
And good point. This, you know, this has all been brought up, and there's been a lot of discussion about what we need to do from, you know, Stockwell Engineering as well as from the city level. So throughout our discussion, I don't want anybody to think that this city has not been working on this or has not put their due diligence into this, because they have. We created this to try and get the community involved in this process, and I want to make sure that we hear the community voices as well. And I'm glad we're doing that, because again, my mind has been changed a little on some issues. So I think it's a good process we're going through. But there's definitely been a lot of people working on this, and we've got a huge task in front of us. With respect to time, we'll move on. So the next item on the agenda is an RFQ and RFP discussion. So at our last council meeting, having an open RFQ and or RFP process was brought up, and several council members said, well, why don't you bring this to the table, to the water committee. So I'm going to plant that bug in your mind. We're going to come back to this in a few minutes, but I want you to keep this in mind while we hear what MCWC has to say. That's why I mention it now. So we do have a gentleman here from MCWC, Scott Buss, to speak with us about a possible connection to MCWC. Again, for short-term and long-term, and both of those, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, are things that we need to talk about. But I asked Scott to join us tonight so that we can answer or have some questions answered directly from MCWC. So we're going to talk about the actual connection, whether we want to do it or not, as a committee here in a few moments. For now, I want Scott to kind of come up and present some of the information he presented to the city the other day, and again, we'll let him talk about the idea of this, and then I'd like to open the floor up again to questions directly to Scott, so that it's coming from his mouth and not mine. So come on up, Scott. Hate to put you on the spot, but yeah, if you want to stand and address the group, sure. Christina, do I need to turn this mic off so that one picks up? Okay. Hey Brian, can you pass that recorder to the middle of the table?
Okay. So is that what I'm supposed to do or what I'm not supposed to do? Okay. Yeah. Hi, my name is Scott Buss. I'm the Executive Director of Minnehaha Clean Water. We sat down earlier this week with the folks from the city and the folks from Stockwell and talked about what our options were, and talked about the possibility of Minnehaha Community Water providing some water either on a temporary, short-term, medium-term, or long-term basis. We've had some conversations with the folks here in town previously, and so we had the engineers take a look at what would be available, and they've got the ability to run our network analysis, look at what we can get out of the treatment plant, how that affects the levels in the water towers and the distribution system. And I guess there's a couple different ways of approaching it. Currently, if you look around town, you'll see some MCWC facilities around. We've got a water tower on the north end of the Corson Industrial Park. We've also got a water tower on Maple Street, east or west across 6 Mile Road. And then we've got a line, an 8-inch line that runs right down the middle of Sioux Boulevard, and the booster station across from the new school down on the south side of town. So we've got some lines of some different sizes around town and some ability to do things. One of the first things we looked at is what could we do without putting a lot of money into infrastructure. And what the network model said was we could get somewhere around 250 or 300 gallons per minute, which is roughly 300,000 or 400,000 gallons a day, delivered from the tank in the Corson Industrial Park. And it would only take a few small changes. We'd have to put a control valve in the booster station to be able to control the level in that tower. Then we just kept pushing the model to see where the other changes would be based on what the different delivery methods or delivery levels would be. When we got up to 1 million gallons, it looked like we were going to have to do probably 4 or 5 miles of larger pipe just to be able to get the water from the treatment plant down to this area.
And you're talking a
deliver it
million gallons a day.
to- 1 million gallons a day.
Yeah, so just so everybody understands, okay?
We're right now allocated for 1 million gallons on the east side from our Lewis and Clark connection. I guess the caveat on that is, you know, we joined Lewis and Clark for 1 million gallons on the west side, 1 million gallons on the east side, and temporarily we've got extra capacity on the east side of the county, everything east of the river. One of the concerns is that at some point, the natural growth around the county between the dairies and the towns and the folks just building rural homes is going to need that 1 million gallons. So while the 300 gallons a minute is kind of more of a long term, we could do something medium term, probably with 1 million gallons a day. But in 10 years, it's
What do you
likely
consider
that,
medium term?
well, in about 10 years, we're going to need that back for our folks. So to us, that's kind of the medium term.
So we would have it for 10 years and then it's gone.
Potentially.
Or
And
reduced.
Unless,
To the
Or
300.
reduced, I mean, it depends on how that goes. And,
do I understand it correct that, and that is unless we provide you a written request or some type of a contract stating we would like to do essentially business with you long-term, are you able to get more water to fulfill that need if we want to do something long-term?
If Brandon would like to do something long-term, then we really need to go back to the engineers and look at the model, and then it pulls everything in. We'll have to look at our well capacity, just like you guys are looking at your well capacity. We'll have to look at our treatment plant capacity, and then since our wells are up between Baltic and Del Rapids, we'll have to look at how we get the water from all the way up there down here. So it would be something pretty significant infrastructure cost-wise, and it wouldn't be a quick project.
Can I get a clarification?
Sure.
On the Lewis and Clark, so when you said that, you know, the potential for shorter term was 1 million gallons per day, does that still go back to having to put the 5 miles of pipe in?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Just to get it from where it's coming in and down in the 6 Mile Road and Highway 42 area,
Okay.
up and around Brandon, and get it to that tower.
And you were saying the 300 gallons per minute would be more of a long term, so that's what we
Potentially.
would be looking at if we were to back it off with the exact same amount of infrastructure that's currently? I mean,
It wouldn't take us a lot to be able to deliver the 250 to 300
Okay.
gallons per minute, or that's 300,000 or 400,000 a day.
and that would be long term, that would not be something we would.
Possibly, yeah.
So this could,
Possibly be long-term.
so this would be in supplement to what we have current,
Yes.
as a long-term kind of a thing. So what kind of changes would have to be made to our water treatment plant compared to yours so that they mesh well?
The biggest thing is the disinfection system. We currently use chloramines, which is a mixture of chlorine and ammonia, to disinfect, and that was partly to match the quality of the water coming in from Lewis and Clark. That doesn't mix well with regular chlorinated water, so Brandon would probably have to go to adding ammonia at the treatment plant to match water quality. That would be the primary concern.
Does anybody know, is that a huge expense, just out of curiosity?
Well, so we talked, so this is a huge question, right? Because, and we talked, I talked to some folks about this, and I don't want to get too far into this, but it sounds like chloramined water, which is what we would need to do to treat their water or to match their water system. Chloramine water might be a good option for our long-term, if we're looking at getting water from other sources and or just treating our water to deliver a higher quality.
Okay.
I mean, in other words, we wouldn't, the way to look at this is we wouldn't necessarily be changing our treatment plant just for this. We would be able to take advantage of that down the road. And those items we'll be getting to in the, in the meeting, because there's a lot to talk about, but I think it's important to understand that the short term, yes, we would need to do it to be able to utilize their water, but it may benefit us in the long term. And it may not, I mean, you know, who knows, but just something to think about. Scott, you had mentioned the water tower. Would we need to purchase the water tower to utilize this connection?
No, not at all. One of the things that we had talked about, and I talked with the folks at Stockwell a year or better ago, was that we're not utilizing that water tower as much as it could be, partly because Lewis and Clark is coming in further down the system and we're not running as much water through it. There was a possibility, if that's an option, of looking at somehow selling it to the city where the city could use it. That's not a requirement for us to deliver water.
Because we were talking about even upkeep costs of the water tower. And Scott mentioned it was recently painted on, and I use the term recently loosely, but recently painted on the inside, interior and exterior, which is important.
Interior only.
Interior only, okay, all right.
So what you see on the outside is what you get.
What size is that one?
It is a 300,000 gallon tank.
And right now, we currently boost water up to the industrial park. So is there any energy savings with running that?
That's a good question.
Running that area off the tower?
Right, absolutely.
So, good point, yeah.
Scott, do you guys have any future water rights?
We do have some future water rights in the Big Sioux Basin yet that haven't been put to beneficial use.
Yeah, where was that?
Between Baltic and Del Rapids, in that area, yeah.
So when you're mentioning that this has potential long-term or, and so when your residents reach a certain volume, then we would be kind of cut off from that source long-term. Is it by region? Is it, I mean, how are you determining who gets it and who kind of doesn't?
I think we'd have to sit down with both of the engineering groups and say, you know, this is what we expect the city of Brandon to use in this amount of time, and this is what our projections are for the east side of the county, and work on something that the board approves, obviously, that we would say if we commit for this much water for this amount of time, then we'll make it happen.
Another question I've been posted with is, you know, time constraint. Do you have, you know, I called, who was it, Garrettson I called Garrettson and Del Rapids. Garrettson, just so everyone knows, Garrettson has a fertilizer treatment plant coming, and they're going to need a massive amount of water in the near future. But it's my understanding you can't provide that. It's too much for you guys to provide to them. Is that?
It doesn't work with where they have it sited without a bunch of infrastructure.
Okay. So, you know, we have to look at this as, if we want to consider this, do we need to do this now? You know, is there a time constraint on this? Can you speak to that?
It's not something that has to be decided tonight or in the next 6 months. You know, it's something that I would expect we would take a while to look at in the study and to do the network analysis.
Even for the short
term. There's also going to be some infrastructure that's going to be required. The city will need to build some sort of a meter building that would be able to meter the water that's going from one system to another and include some backflow prevention. And in a way of controlling, either through SCADA or some other method, how the city of Brandon fills their towers and how that water gets delivered.
And if the city of Brandon needs to switch to chloramines as a means of disinfection, you know, that is something else that we need to consider as a community too.
So yes, absolutely. That would have to happen at the same time.
Not just the cost, but there's a substantial public education process that goes along with switching from free chlorine to chloramines too. If you have tropical fish or
They will die.
Dialysis equipment into
dialysis equipment, things like that.
Okay.
And the other option is segregating a portion of town that would only get chloraminated water, and then the rest would get chlorinated. But those decisions are politically charged.
I think
So-
we'd have a political nightmare, and I don't want to be a part of it. You guys can find another
all you.
committee leader, because I don't want anything to do with it.
Well, I think the one point that was brought up is the proximity to the industrial park, and trying to shed some of the burden. I mean, that, as much as I don't want to segregate, but that might be an easy win for us. Is, you know, I don't want it to be political either. That's the last thing I want, because it just makes a mess. But you know, with the proximity of the water tower to the industrial park and the potential volumes that they would have, it'd be interesting to look at what our top 10 users are in the city of Brandon for water use and see where they're located. You might be surprised at where that proximity is. It happens to be to MCWC. I don't know what it is, but it'd be interesting to see on a map where's the top 10 producers, or users, I'm sorry.
Users, yeah. Yep. So now's the time to ask questions. You know, we talked about this back in the summer when we had the water shortage, the water ban and restrictions in place. Like he said, this is a potential to add, you know, roughly 400,000 gallons a day to our system.
Can you remind me again what average day was? What's our average day demand for Brandon?
Winter time, 650 to 750.
Yeah, 750. And what was our peak this summer?
2.2.
When we were getting up in that 1.8 range for several sustained days, that's when things started getting a little iffy. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Did I understand right, if we would hook up to the MCWC water, we would not need water tower? So right now, kind of the proposal on the table is to buy land and to build 2 water towers?
I think the original question was, to get water from us, would the city of Brandon need to purchase our tower?
I see.
We're talking
And that
about the
was
tower
no.
out at the industrial park.
Yeah.
Okay. So
The other
we
two
would
are
still need
independent
to have
decisions.
Water towers to store water
Yeah, conversation.
within our city.
Possibly. We haven't got there yet, and that's a good question. The water tower I was talking about is the one out in the industrial park, which they own. And my question was, if we were to do this, we're going to have some costs, some infrastructure costs, building the pumps and valves and stuff. But do we also need to buy that water tower? And the answer is no. Now, your question, do we need these 2 additional water towers that have been proposed? That's still, we'll be getting, it might be a little bit, but we'll get there. I don't know. I can honestly say now more than ever, I don't know.
I was just curious, I didn't know, you know, if it's a direct pipe coming into the pipes that feed our homes, or the water treatment plant, then out to the homes, or if it has to be stored in that water tower, and then, that's what I didn't understand.
Sure. No, absolutely, it's a good
This is
question.
still not something that we would be able, it would take way over a year to get this probably implemented.
That's a question for, I think, Brian. What do you think on timing if we were to make this decision?
You know, it's gonna take a while to design the changeover to the getting away from chlorines.
Yep.
We've got, you know, publication requirements. You know, you're looking at 3 months minimum to design. You're probably looking at a couple of months bidding. So you're looking at 5 months out minimum, and then construction. And that's if everything falls into place. So yeah, you're looking at probably a year. You know, the public education component. There are issues with odor, taste, coloration of the water. Chlorine and chlorines do not mix well. They don't play well together. You know, we'll kill fish and other stuff. So it's not just a matter of flipping a switch, making a connection, flipping a switch. It's not going to happen tomorrow, even under the best case scenario. So you're looking at probably 6 months before minimum, before everything gets studied, figured out, and we're under construction.
So quality, is there really a lot of difference in the quality of water?
Good question. I asked the same.
The hardness of the water, we do a lime softening, like the city of Sioux, like Lewis and Clark, and our hardness is down around that 180 to 200 parts per million.
It's a little less than half ours. to give you an example. And then radium, am I correct? You said that you don't even,
We do variation in the lime softening, so it is an undetectable level in our water.
so it's my understanding the quality of water is quite good. Yeah, I guess I was under the impression the other day when we talked that I think that 6 months was a possibility to have this up and going. Is that am I wishful thinking here? I know that's I know that's tough to say.
With no problems, maybe. No issues, maybe, but there's always problems.
Nothing money won't solve.
So yeah, if everything goes well, 6 months is really pushing it.
Okay.
Yeah, so if we wanted to have water by summer, what's our drop dead date to saying yes?
A year ago.
Good to know,
Exactly, yeah.
thank you. So,
But what's the
Yeah.
potential of having the other wells online that are producing more water anyway?
In that timeframe, you mean, in that,
Yeah, I mean,
That year.
in like 6 months or a year from now, how much are we producing with well seven
So-
coming online?
It's still a treatment issue, isn't it? Treatment plant?
Yeah, it is,
Well, they're
but,
fine,
I mean, we're talking about water quantity is one thing, and
That's what I
water
mean, is
quality
the
is
quantity.
other thing. And so, right now, we're saying, well, can we have it done in 6 months to prevent a shortage? That's not water quality, that's water quantity.
Right, and
Quantity.
the water treatment plant won't run any more than what it is, isn't it? Isn't that correct? Or am I incorrect on that one? Are we,
It's only running at about 1,460 gallons a minute right now, with wells 1 and 6. So capacity of the plant is 2,000 gallons a minute.
I
which
think
would be
that's-
what per day?
Well, that put us at about theoretically 2.8, but using the HMO process, you're going to cut back up your downtime, so you're going to have to cut that back 2.2.
So right about where our max is, that would still be our trigger point. No matter what water is going into it per se, I'm talking about like this next summer. We would still have, when we have to cut off, or we're using too much water, that 1.6 trigger point that you have.
Well,
We don't have a trigger point
doesn't use
anymore.
that anymore. We use the automatic, all year round, it's odd, even watering.
Right, I know that. Sorry, I just mean that I know that means it's taxing the system when you get that high.
Right.
So no matter what water's going into it, the amount of water that comes out of the treatment plant isn't going to change from what it currently maxes out at. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I lose you?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay,
And that's correct. yeah.
okay.
And do we have any projections with what we have already in the plans of potential growth of, building permits out there? I guess I'm a little concerned on that issue as, we keep growing.
Growth is what, 2.2% or so?
It's probably closer to 1.5.
1.5%.
That's residential, what about commercial?
That's complete use.
Oh.
I think that's everything, yeah.
And are we concerned at all about that becoming more of an issue?
That's my question too. I mean, is there a point where we stop the building permits until we can?
I don't want to see that,
No.
but I don't know. I mean, if we're concerned at the quality and quantity of living here in Brandon, how do we address that if we keep allowing continual things happening and coming in? That's going to take more from our systems until we have something implemented in
If
place.
people follow the odd even schedule, we won't hit that.
We shouldn't.
We should be down by the 1.2 average per day,
So how many years?
which gives us at least 5 years, I think was what we were saying, wasn't it? I mean,
5 to 7.
right, okay, there you go.
We recommended that the plant be up and running within 5 years.
If we're using between 650 and 750,000 gallons a day now with no outdoor water use, we still have a lot of capacity to grow.
Right.
We just have to manage what we have
Yes, sir.
best way possible while we look for future alternatives. So part of that is education and water conservation. So I think we have time to figure this out with what we have in place right now. So, as a committee member, I don't think there's any, I don't want to say there's not a sense of urgency, but not to the point where we need to make decisions in the next 2 weeks, right?
Right.
We've got some time to figure this out.
Yeah.
There's an urgency, there's not a panic.
Well, it's just good planning.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
Anyone else? Is there a capacity charge associated with getting that extra capacity from the water system?
Typically, what we've done with the towns that we serve, and we serve 7 other towns in Minnehaha County, is each, as part of the membership that the town pays, is the infrastructure that's dedicated to them. So we would want you guys to build the booster station, the meter, and the stuff that benefits just you. And then our rates are pretty consistent across the towns, so that there isn't a capacity charge.
So just out of curiosity, of any other towns that you service, is there, do you have like your little cooperative where you supply so much and they supply so much? Or do you, the communities that you serve, it's all your water and that's it?
There's a few towns that have the ability to add to what we provide. The big reason that we supplied to most of them was that they were having their own issues. Coleman had nitrate issues, Garrettson had gross alpha issues, and pretty much when we started supplying the towns, their wells have just become a backup.
Okay. What I'm curious is, okay, if we have, let's say 300 gallons per minute coming in as a supplement to what we already have, are people gonna get 2 water bills? One from you and one from the city of Brandon?
No, the city,
No.
the city
It'd
would
all
pay
be
them.
the city, okay, I just wanted to make sure.
It would be a bulk customer. the city.
Okay.
And with regards to your question about other communities doing this, I asked the question when we met, has anyone else gone through this process of changing their treatment plant to chloramine water? And the answer was yes, there's been a number of them that have done this recently, and they did it in a pretty timely manner from my understanding. Madison was one of them, is that right?
Madison and Big Sioux both changed their disinfection from chlorine to chloramine last year as we did the cooperative plan where Lewis and Clark delivered extra water to us, we delivered to Big Sioux delivered to Madison. And because that water was made straight on the pipeline, then everybody had to match disinfection systems.
And I asked the obvious question: cost. What does it cost coming from MCWC? And I think it's a relatively decent number. I mean, you said probably it's going to be somewhere around that $2 range.
That's our rate to the other towns.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. Because I think we talked about who was it? Was it Sioux Falls that was going to be possibly $8? This is per 1,000. So that's something to think about. If we're going to talk about alternate water sources, $2 versus is something to be considered. Go ahead, Mindy.
Sorry, I apologize. So how does switching our disinfectant over affect the current water that we're pumping into it? So say we want to use them as the backup in case one of our wells go out. Once we get 6 and 7 online and we need to rehab 6, because I know that's something that needs to be done. And so we want to use them as a backup to mix them with 7. To change all of that over, how does that affect the water that we currently use? I mean, is it going to, are we going to have to change anything?
It's going to be an effect because of the different type of water that we'll be getting. If we don't have solid water, for example, but we've changed over to chloramines. Chloramines, at least we'll be able to blend well.
Okay.
So you may have a change of some of the taste and stuff, and not significant, but you may have some changes there.
Okay. Because, this isn't going to be 200, 300, or, gallons per minute. That's not going to be an only source kind of thing. So we're still going to have to blend it with the water that we're currently getting out of 6 and 7, 1, 6 and 7, whatever we choose to do. So I just want to know how, we have to incur the costs and switch over our disinfectant to match their water, if we're not using their water on a consistent basis, how does that affect the water that we are pumping in there? So
It will
that
change,
was,
it will change as you use their water versus ours, you know, if you're blending it, it'll, you know,
Be
in certain
less.
areas wherever it's coming in, it'll be blended and it will change slightly.
So
Well,
are you
whether it's
asking
or not, I don't know.
if the city plans to use Minnehaha just as a backup, emergency connection, would we still need to convert to chloramines so we don't have this blending issue from time to time?
well, it's my understanding, anytime we use your water, we're gonna have to use the chloramines. So if we're even using them as a backup, we're gonna have to switch all of our
Yes.
process to the chloramines.
Right.
So what I was asking is how does that affect the water we're pumping in there today when we're not using their water? If we just needed to use their water on an intermittent basis or an emergency basis. And that way, you know, we're not incurring the cost all year, but maybe we just need it during the summer, maybe we just need it during December or whatever. We need it when our well goes, you know, well 6, when we rehab that, that'll take 3 to 4 months. We need extra supply of water. But if we're not using them on a regular basis, how does that affect the taste and the quality of our water that we're using
Blending.
right now?
I don't know that people will really notice the difference.
Okay.
But there will be a difference in that, just like when we use well 3,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't think anybody noticed this year,
Yeah.
and that's different.
Mhm.
So, I mean, so I don't know if people will really notice the difference.
Okay.
It is different.
It will be different, okay.
But you can switch back and forth between chloramines and
No.
chlorine?
No, that's what I'm saying, you have, yeah, if we're gonna use them at all, we have to completely
Completely
change the
switch forever?
process.
Yes.
Okay.
Forever, yes.
Got it.
Forever.
I got a question. So I get this chlorine thing. What does that have to do, or how does that relate to the HMO process that we're using for the radium thing? Is that
doesn't.
separate?
Yeah.
That's a different
It's a
thing?
different thing.
So that would still be going on no matter, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
That's a different thing.
So I want to clear something up. We're talking a lot about blending, and I think that's getting brought up a lot because of the speaker before, but it's all about entry point. So MCWC would not enter at the treatment plant, would not be able to be blended at the treatment plant with well 7, unless we specifically pipe to that. So if we were connecting at Robert Bennis or at up at the industrial park, that water isn't going to make it to the plant, so it's not going to be able to be blended with well 7. In that case, we wouldn't be able to reap the rewards, if you will, of blending well 7. So if well 6 goes down, we hook up to MCWC. We can't say we're blending MCWC with well 7 to get the reduced radium
Because
value.
now we have 2 entry points, is what you're saying?
That's correct,
Okay, yeah.
unless we bring it to the treatment plant.
Is there any potential for you guys to get more Lewis and Clark water?
I know a town that'd be
Not
interested.
cheaply or easily for us.
Could you repeat that?
Not cheaply or easily for us to get more water from Lewis and Clark.
So if we were to utilize MCWC as, you know, a supplement to what we currently have, would that take any of our current wells offline? Like, for instance, well 3, would that be taken offline or not used? Or is there any effect to any of the wells?
Well, 3's not used now.
It's just for emergency, it was just that one
Okay,
emergency.
so it would continue to be a
It was
backup?
used for 7
Yes.
days last year, and
Yep.
that was it.
Okay, all right.
But it's still there whenever, if we ever need it.
If we
Right.
need it.
Yep.
Yes.
Any other questions? I mean, you know, when we met the other day, I think there was some good energy about it. It seemed like to have that quantity, the extra quantity there as supplemental or emergency. But I think we have to look at timing too.
And that's something
I guess
that
I was hoping it
our
would be done soon.
team at the water treatment plant determines how much is being used and how much is not. So if it isn't needed at our 650 that we're utilizing right now, we wouldn't be touching it. We wouldn't turn it on. And so that cost wouldn't come to the residents because, you know, I mean, you're still gonna have, there's our residents and us are still gonna have to pay for that water when it's coming through, even though we have ours on full blast. Now we're gonna use some of MCWC's, we're gonna incur that.
Well, we would have to, maybe I'm speaking for Brian, but I think we'd have to factor that into the billing.
You
right?
average it out.
If we utilize the MCWC water, we would factor that in as an expenditure and how that would impact the rates.
You just average it.
Let's say $2 per 1,000 gallons, if we're doing 400,000 gallons a day, we're talking $1,000 a day. So if you do it June, July, and August, you're looking at 90 days. And that's a pretty easy number to throw into a budget and say, okay, at $90,000 for the year, on average, it's going to increase rates or change rates by X amount. And the control would be, through the SCADA system, so that, if we don't have enough water coming in through our system, the SCADA system tells the other pumps to turn on. And I'm simplifying this because that's beyond me, but tells the other systems to turn on and it starts pumping water. So it's not like we have to go up there and poke a button or start a pump. It does it automatically.
You're gonna take the first shift, right?
Yeah,
First shift.
Mindy's got the first.
Well, it doesn't really want to save money.
That's right.
Automatic release.
So again, in the interest of time, Scott, I can't thank you enough. I was hesitant to ask because this is his personal time. He probably would rather be at home with his family right now, and I asked him if he could join us. So I thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You've been a tremendous help. Thank you. And we'll try and push through the rest here. So we kind of had an open discussion on that. So the next question is, that I said we'd be getting to is, we were at the council meeting, it was presented to utilize this possible MCWC connection, not necessarily turn it on and change everything, but at least make the connection to have in place if we needed it. And as a man of my word, I said I would bring it to the committee, and so here we are. I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. Is this something that you guys want to consider looking into? And when I say looking into, obviously there's a lot of cost issues we need to look at. How much will this affect our rates, or will they change at all? Because initially in the summer, every problem that we ever had with this was a quantity issue. It wasn't quality at first. I think quality's been kind of an ongoing issue, but what put us in this situation was quantity, and this could help solve the quantity problem, in my opinion.
I think so too, I agree with that.
Well, I think we have to also look at the whole picture of the plan, because we need to look at 5 to 10 years, we need to look at 20, and we need to look at 50. And we have to, how is this, with the wells that we have now, where is that going to bring us in that 50 year? I really do believe that.
So, and that's a good question. We do need to look at other sources. I guess I look at this as, this would be approximately 400,000 gallons a day. Like he said, that's short-term, mid-term, or long-term. They can't commit to 1 million a day long-term, but they could commit to this number, short-term and long-term. Sorry.
Nope, I was just gonna
He
say.
said probably,
Yeah, there's no doubt.
There was still no guarantee, so I think it's a good avenue to look at.
Right.
And I think we could look at it as giving us an additional 10 years. But again, I guess until you've got something in writing.
In writing, absolutely.
I feel like we're in an information gathering time right now. I don't think we can say yay or nay, we should go forward or do anything more with. I think we've got all this great information, and if you have other questions, to give him a call. But let's get the next one in here and start talking about our wells and what's underneath us, and get all the information before we start.
Quantity next week,
Okay.
and so I think that will
Help
add
us.
a lot of information
Yeah.
to this, and will make it clear.
Okay, so I had on the agenda, I'm sorry, go ahead.
As far as bringing it to the city council, I would think we are all in agreement, we need to take a look at it. I think yes would
Okay.
be that, yes, take it to the council
Okay,
and pursue
so
it.
the question is, take it to the council. What do you want me to do? Do we want to say, let's create an RFQ process for this? I guess that's what I have on the agenda. That's the big question.
Well, I think we all heard that there's time it's going to take time.
Right.
And I don't think we've ever really sat down and determined what our timeline as a committee, what is our deadline? When do we need to have a decision made? We have never discussed that. So maybe that's, when is our deadline?
Well, so we don't have one. This is kind of an on-demand process. And as far as decisions, I think we need to address decisions, some of them as we come to them. In other words, I don't want to wait 6 months till we're done with this committee and address all of these decisions.
Absolutely.
If we can address some of them now, I'd like to. I guess the thought was, regarding this, the thought was if we start an RFQ process now, some of the work could be done. Thanks, guys. Some of the work could be done over the winter, or do we wait till summer to even talk about it?
I guess I kind of understood the RFQ and RFP as something separate, like as a peer review of the projects that Stockwell's have done already. So that's just another piece. So that doesn't have anything to do with MCWC per se. It's just going over what they've done so far. That was my understanding of what we're talking about with the RFPQ. Am I wrong?
Well, there's two topics here to talk about. Number one, again, at the council meeting, it was addressed that do we start opening our water projects, and we're kind of diving into this next topic here, but that's fine. Do we start opening our water projects up to an RFQ process? Meaning we look at multiple firms out there to do the, to respond to our RFQ, our request for proposal, and we look at their costs, their experience, their quality of work, and make a decision on who we're going to use. That's the other agenda, the item on the agenda tonight that we need to discuss. But
getting back to going to the council, was the idea that you wanted to take something to them at the next meeting? Or, I mean, it seems like, I understand we want to respond, but I don't know that we want to respond after every single meeting we have. I think we should, maybe it's a month of discussion and recap them on that discussion. But going to them every meeting, it's like, what's the point of us
When we
meeting
have
with them?
something.
yeah, when we have something. And again, I was approached with, can you talk about this at the water committee meeting and come back to us with an answer of what does the water committee think with regards to this? Do they want to start an RFQ process, which we'll talk about in a second? Do they want to start an RFQ process for a connection to MCWC? Not necessarily spend money on it yet, but open it up to the possibility of doing this in the near future. Do we want to look at how much this would cost? What are the pros and cons of this?
I think the discussion next week on quantity, though, I mean, if we find out next meeting that the Split Rock Aquifer isn't a supply for us for 50 years, then we all can say, yeah, we have to, right?
Right.
And so I think at least that meeting has to take place before we just jump to the next one.
I agree too. I don't think we can go and tell them anything about what we've learned tonight as far as that part.
It may be one piece of the puzzle, but
Right.
until we see a little bit more, I think, at least I'm more comfortable waiting to hear from Derek next week to see what South Dakota Geological Survey has to say.
Okay.
I think that will shed a lot of information on some of the questions you have, and I think we can make a better decision and have a better plan after we kind of get that quantity. So you have quantity, we have quality, and we talked about conservation. We have several different avenues to pursue.
Right. That's why this is so difficult. There's not an easy solution here. Okay, well, again, as a man of my word, I will take your voice to the council, and if you want me to tell them you want to wait for more information, that's what I'll do. So without Stockwell voting on this, and I discussed this with the city staff, without city staff voting on this, I'd like to at least vote on it. So, I mean, I've heard several people say I would like to wait, but can we do an official vote on this so I can defend my actions.
I would just like to add one thing, because Minnehaha rural water connection, we're talking about a short-term solution. And what I'm hearing most of us say is that right now we can't determine if we have a short-term issue. And so until that question is answered, and I think that's what can be brought to council, is we don't know right now if we have a short-term issue, because that hasn't been answered. We don't know what our supply is, and until we really can answer within the next 3 to 5 years, do we really have a short-term issue?
I guess I would say short term is, what does the treatment plant look like next summer? Because that has not been answered at all. What is the reduced output of the plant running the HMO system? We've heard 1.6, we've heard 1.8, we've heard 2.2, we've heard 2.6 million. What is pencil to paper the plant capable of? And that unknown is why I discussed MCWC as an additional water source. Because that plant, I have no idea where it's at. It's not my expertise, but if we were to look at that plant, we've heard that the back flushes are changing from 24 hours down to 14 hours, that the HMO system is going to fill that green sand media faster. We've heard that it will reduce the plant, but we haven't heard by how much. And I know that last year we were not great at conserving water. That's why we talked about conservation first. But we have to base our decisions as a community on not the best case, and hopefully not the worst case, but I'm really hoping that residents do what they're supposed to do and conserve water. I can tell you that I had a oops this summer, and my wife left the soaker hoses on in the garden. Obviously, Tim Wakefield, not a great conservation guy, and that happens. But
over 4 days of the water running. I know.
Yeah, it's not great. But when I look at where we were at last summer, there's been absolutely nothing done to improve our situation. There's actually been work done that has made our situation worse by reducing the plant efficiencies. So that's why I think it's urgent to at least work with MCWC to figure out what's there. Is it, MCWC, my understanding is they've asked, what are you looking for water? MCWC has asked the city to provide information, and I don't know if that's been done, that's not my position, but how do we make sure that we understand what our ultra short-term situation is? Is it next summer? Can we even be hooked up to MCWC? It doesn't sound like it, but where are we at for next summer? And that's why I guess I think MCWC makes sense, at least to see, where does it take us for summer? I sure hope we're not in a position we need it.
And Tim, I would agree with that, just because it seems to me that there's not a huge dollar amount invested to just be able to hook up. And if we need it, it will be there. Excuse me. If not, we don't need it then.
Well, before, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know that that's actually,
Costs a lot.
yeah, I mean, it's not, I don't think that he was saying there was a big expense to hook up to their system.
I know that
But the
there's
expense to get the treatment and
Right.
everything done, I think that could be fairly expensive and probably not something that we have budgeted for this year.
In my mind, it seems the same case scenario would be if we went with another, whether it's MCWC or this one or that one, there's going to be that expense regardless. And I just think that we do need to have a, maybe not short-term, but medium-term, whatever, plan that we can at least start to look at. I'm not saying spend the money, I'm not saying...
Right, and that's where I kind of agree. I wouldn't mind starting to look into this process now, not necessarily spend the money yet, because obviously we've only talked about it for an hour, but granted the city has talked about it more than that, but we as a group, I think, can address more issues. And yes, I promise you, we will come up with a short-term, medium-term, long-term plan, a 30-year plan at the end of this process. But again, I'm one person. I mean, that was kind of my thinking. You know, do we at least start investigating this? Do I go to the council and say, I think we should start investigating this? Or
Can we just wait one more
I'm going to
week?
take your
That's my
word to the
thought.
council. I'm going to.
It's 1 week.
Yeah.
Then we can have more information rather than wasting staff people's time on this. Say maybe next week we change our mind. It's just one more week. That's my thought. I mean, I understand that city council meeting will then be
Right.
another 2.
Okay, so let's do this.
Well, one thing.
Yes, sir.
I want to clear up. In my discussions with MCWC, they have never asked how much water we need. We've had discussions, how much can you provide us, and whether it's for peaking or not, but they have never asked me or any staff member whatsoever how much we need as a minimum. So where you're getting your information from is incorrect.
Okay.
And I think the other thing is just what is that, I mean, even though we said it's minimal, we don't know what that cost is, but I mean, minimal may be $1 million. You know, we're comparing it to a 5-mile line, and so I don't know that I just want to spend $1 million not knowing next year if that $1 million was spent worthwhile.
But
Okay.
again, this is just investigating, right? We weren't spending any money, we're just.
Right.
Correct.
we're just
But somebody
gonna-
has to do that
Somebody
work.
has to do the work,
Yeah.
so you're
Right.
still gonna incur some cost to figure that out. And Kim said if we could just wait a week, we would have a little bit more information.
And I'm okay with that.
Can we get that,
so-
the question of the HMO system, how much water will be going through? If we could have that by next week, that'd be awesome.
Okay, so we'll have that answered. Yes, sir. Raleigh, go ahead. And then we're going to vote on this.
I listen to this a lot, and I keep hearing the backwash thing coming back. People have to understand that the plant does not physically shut down every time there's a backwash. There are 4 green sand filters. When one filter comes to the point where it needs to backwash, it shuts that one down, the other 3 pick up for the other one. So you're not throttling the plant down,
Okay.
you're just diverting it to different sections of that. So,
That's good to know.
I mean, it's not like you're shutting it down. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a 20-minute process, and once that's done, you have a short period of time, and then there's a reclaim process that'll actually help pump back into the system, whatever you backwash.
Okay.
It takes 10% of that and puts it back into the system, about 165 gallons a minute roughly.
Okay. Okay, good info. So let's vote on this. Again, I started to say, and I'm kind of taking a few steps back. I was going to mention this earlier. You know, Stockwell is here in an advisory role. I want people to know that because I'm getting hammered on this. You know, why are they on the committee? Technically, they're here just as in an advisory position. I want to make that clear. They're not residents, and it would be a conflict of interest for them to vote on items, right? So they will not vote, and I discussed this with city officials, Paul and Brian. They want to stay out of the voting too, just so that it does not seem like it's a biased thing. With regards to that, everyone else at this table, I know Kim Klarmlichek from 5 years ago. We listed a house, my mother-in-law's house, with her. And Kim Serwick, I know as, of course, she's the president of our chamber. I don't know anyone else here. So I just want to make that clear because people are saying I handpicked this committee. I've never met any of these individuals before in my life. I knew of Mindy, but technically I never really met her. Yeah. So I want to make sure that we understand this is going to be this process is going to be unbiased. I tried to create this committee with members of our community that have a little to offer from each area, and some of us don't have any knowledge to offer when it comes to water, but that's okay. Our vote still counts, our voice still counts, and that's why I'm committed to listening to everyone in this community, listening to their concerns. So with that being said, let's just vote on this. Everybody that chooses to say, let's wait a week before we present information to the council about a connection with MCWC, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Okay, okay. So, and I withheld my vote as well, just so, again, it's fair. So with that being said, overwhelmingly, yes, we will hold off a week and address it then. Is fair enough? Any objections? Okay. Last but not least, and I'm sorry for the long night. I knew this was going to be a long night, but there's a lot, we have a lot to discuss. And this shouldn't take too long, but again, this was an item that was brought up at council meeting that I said we would bring to this committee. You know, the process of having an open RFQ or RFP process when it comes to our water projects. The floor is yours. Let me know what you think. Does everybody, first of all, does everybody understand what we're saying?
Not the difference between the two, but I mean, RFP is, but what's RFQ?
So you're requesting qualifications.
So technically, there's a request for quote, which is an RFQ, and in this environment, it's called an RFQ, request for qualifications.
One has price and one doesn't. RFQ is your.
Correct.
The qualifications of the firm. RFP is an request for proposals, so actual
So yeah,
cost.
one of both.
Well, you might,
or
use
you
it
could do
as
a
way
combination
to-
of the two.
You might get qualifications from 8 firms, and you want to, narrow it down to 3, and have those 3 submit a proposal.
Right.
And so it's just a process of, kind of eliminating or selecting someone you want to move forward with to learn more about them.
Okay. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So now that we understand what an RFQ and/or RFP is this something that you guys want to come forward to the council and say, hey, I would like to open this up to, 3 or 4 qualified firms, or do we just stay with one?
So in the past, how long has Stockwell been with the Brandon City? How long has the partnership been?
A long time.
I'm brand new, so I don't know.
I don't know.
Dennis?
30 years.
30?
25, 30 years.
And is that process ever bidded out? I mean.
That's what we're saying, no.
Yes.
Yes, it has been?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Some of it has.
Request for qualifications in the last 10 years.
We went out for RFP for the water study
Yep.
in 2013.
Yep.
Okay.
So is there a record of who else was involved in that?
SEH
Okay.
was involved with it.
Only one.
It was just 2.
Yep.
And were they just those 2 are asked to put it in?
We advertised, I believe.
Yeah, we did advertise.
So what made us do it then and not any other time? What was the differentiating factor there?
It was a system-wide study. Now, if you're talking projects, whether it's design of a street project or a water main, cities typically don't go out for RFQs, RFPs for project-by-project engineering. For the project that we're looking at now with the Holly sanitary sewer reconstruction of Maine, that project, you typically don't go out for RFPs for individual ones like that.
Okay.
Nothing against engineering firms, but you guys all do things different. So you don't want different firms designing the same systems in your community. Like Main Street could be designed by Stockwell, First Street could be designed by SEH,
Sure.
3rd Street could be designed by Sayer. It just doesn't add to any continuity. If you're looking at system-wide studies, it's good to get different opinions.
What about in this case? This would be a system-wide, or this would be system-wide projects, because we're talking about all of our water projects here. We're not talking about anything else, streets, we're talking about our.
So are you asking for a whole new water study like they did in 2012? Is that what
No.
we're asking? Okay.
No, we're
I'm
asking,
confused.
do you want to open this up? Do we stay with Stockwell's proposal and stay with Stockwell Engineering for this, whatever we come up with as far as where our water comes from, quality, et cetera, how we treat it? Or do you want to hear from other engineering firms?
I think the general public that I've ever talked to, they'd like to see things more open up, give other opinions. I mean, that's just the general consensus I get from people that talk to me.
I don't know that I could make an educated decision based on one opinion. I would prefer to have the opinion of a couple of firms. I mean, when I was a manager, when I went out to go looking for medical equipment, we put out a bid, you know, and it actually was a blessing to have a system behind me in a small facility where when you buy more, you get more for less. So anyway, it just seems like when you're talking about spending millions of dollars, which potentially this project would be costing, I think it would behoove us to say, yes, we need to have more than one opinion from an engineering firm.
Can I ask a question? So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but it's because I don't understand. Okay, so Stockwell's does a lot of our engineering. You're the city engineer. Tell me the difference between what it is that they do as opposed to what you do and
Well, they've
Go.
continued to do the design of the projects that we've had
okay.
since a city engineer position was a decision that the city wanted to move
Right.
forward with. If we're gonna move forward with discussion on RFQs, I think it's really important that we decide what the RFQ is gonna actually be for.
Right.
And if it's something that the board decides that we're looking at long-term decisions on water quality, water quantity, cost, I mean, you're talking about a study. You're talking about looking at our entire system.
Right. We already
From-
have a study. Wouldn't we just want to do a peer review of said study?
There's differences between peer reviews and RFQs and RFPs. So
Okay.
if you were gonna do an RFP for a new water study, you need to look at potential water sources, not just MCWC, not just Lewis and Clark, even the option to have that, City of Sioux Falls,
Right.
potentially
all of
other
those.
well or Big Sioux Aquifer and Split Rock Creek Aquifer. I mean, and there's probably other water sources that we're not even thinking about. So if we're gonna go out for an RFQ for water sources or potentially look at costs, I mean, we need to narrow that down as a board and really come up with a specific plan for what that RFQ is gonna be.
Well, I think we should.
You have to
doing-
be specific when you put together an RFQ, very detailed scope of work that is going to be very detailed. It's not a,
Can I say, okay, so
it's not an easy process.
stepping back from that, could we just do a peer review of the current plan? That would cost a lot less, correct? Or would be free if we could get, I don't know how it works. No, not free?
Not free. That's
The
wishful
process-
thinking.
In Never Never Land, yes.
Okay, fine.
Peer reviews aren't free either. no.
Okay.
I
but
think
it's
peer
a
reviews are a good
cheaper
idea no matter
option
what.
than an RFQ. So if we had a peer review and it was
I don't know
decently
that-
Not
matching,
necessarily.
no.
Not
Really?
necessarily.
Okay.
So an
Then I don't know what I'm
RFQ
talking about.
has no cost.
Right.
There was a peer review done on our, the current proposal
Okay.
in 2013.
Okay.
There was a cursory review that was sent, I think, to the council members.
You also have to understand an RFQ is not going to give you any product. There's actually no report. It's just, here's our qualifications as an engineering firm.
Okay.
Do you like us or not? There's no
RFQs
report
are like
associated with it.
resumes.
Okay.
If
but
there
why
was
do we want
anything that
that?
we could skip, it would be an RFQ, in my opinion.
Well, it comes
think
with
an
the
RFP
RFP.
Not necessarily.
But.
That information is.
Yeah.
But
Help me out.
if we're talking about looking long-term,
Yeah.
if we're trying to do a thorough, comprehensive job,
Yes.
you're gonna need people who do different things. You are going to need hydrogeologists. You're gonna need, and there are hydrogeologists, they're in Sioux Falls all over the place. But you're gonna need somebody with those skills, not an engineer to do that, but you're gonna need a specific skill to look at what are the options for aquifers and what are, I mean, you need that to go along then with an engineer to decide, okay, how do you make everything go? So you gotta remember you're looking at two different things here, two different skill sets.
So you RFP and hydrologists too?
No, when you do an RFP, so if we just did an RFP, it would be request for proposal based on a certain scope of work. That scope of work has to be very defined. If we
Right.
go out for an RFP, an engineering firm might team with a hydrologist so that they have an actual team
Okay.
that they submit based on that very specific scope of work with costs associated with that. And it's not a bidding process. We talk about a bid.
different.
Our goal as a community, and any community, should not just be who's the cheapest.
No.
And as a professional service, you don't rely on who is the cheapest to do the work. It might potentially even cost us more money if we went through that RFP process to look at a firm that is qualified. So cost, even though we take a look at it, that's not the basis of the decision.
But
It's based, and RFPs still have qualification information in there
Right.
based on the scope of work that we define. And that scope of work has to be very specific.
Typically what happens is you go out, if you do the full-blown process, go out for RFQs, it's just like jobs. You get 8, 10 applicants, you look at it, first round interview, we want to narrow it down to 2 or 3, we'll bring those in for RFPs. We will look at their specific proposal for the work that they're to be doing. And then after you settle on one that you like, then you look at the cost. And then you actually can negotiate with that firm that cost. Well, we want 10 public meetings, you only proposed 5. What's that going to cost? Or we only want 5, you proposed 10. Is that going to change the cost any? So cost in that whole process is the last thing that you look at. You go through the interview process, it's just like hiring somebody. When you hire somebody for a position, it usually comes up in that last interview, how much are you going to pay me? Otherwise, you look at where have they worked, what have they done, do their skill sets meet what we're looking for in the specific job, and then you talk about wages and bennies. So it's the same process as hiring an employee.
So what's being asked of me is, regardless of what we do as far as where do we get our water for short-term and long-term, and regardless of how we treat it, there's going to be an engineering firm or engineering firms involved in that process. And the question to you is, do you want to open that process up to multiple engineering firms and take, choose one at the end of the process, choose one, or do you want to stay with one engineering firm, again, regarding water projects? What are your thoughts? Because I'm getting hammered with this, and I've always said I will voice everybody's concern and bring it to the table, which is what I'm doing, and I want you to tell me what your decision is, what your thoughts are, and we'll make a decision together. For me, this has put me in an unbelievably tough position, because no matter what happens, it's straining relationships, and it really stinks to be in this position. But reality is, I'm a city council member. I've been asked to do this, and I'm going to do it. Yes, ma'am.
Just a question, because I don't know, but if you open it up to engineering firms, are they going to look at what we've already paid for and produced for water studies, or are most engineering firms going to have to do their own water
Gonna wanna
study
do
and
their
have
own.
to pay for another one?
I would sure hope we could use the current
they're
studies in
good-
place.
If they're a good firm, they're gonna grab all the data, all the information they can find from wherever.
And that's just a question, are they going to take what we've already paid for and produced and use that?
And that could be something we include in the scope of service. I don't think we should allow someone to come in and, bill us $2 million for an additional water study or whatever it is. I think the studies have been done, let's take the information and use it, bottom line. And I think that would be part of the process.
Or they might find something that they disagree with.
Right.
And they would want to explore a different avenue.
Right.
They might find something that we have not even thought about, and they would want to explore a different avenue. It just opens it up for things I don't even think.
So are you thinking, is your plan that if by taking a vote or getting our opinions tonight on the RFQ or RFP process, that it starts immediately, or it's a wait and
we need a
see kind of a
scope.
thing, kind of like we wait, like we're the MCWC
Okay, so we
connection,
don't do anything
we're
like
waiting until after next week?
Well, this is more ideology. It's not, we don't have to wait to get information to make this decision.
The scope of work comes later.
That comes later. we
So
need to decide
do
if
we want
you, if you want to open this up to, again, not necessarily a bidding process, but
Just getting the qualifications, just finding out who's qualified and who they're gonna get for their